The night was silent in New York City, but inside a luxury apartment, chaos erupted. Isabella Turner, 7 months pregnant, held her belly tightly as she heard the door slam open. Her husband, Mark Turner, stumbled in reeking of alcohol, rage burning in his eyes. "You useless woman," he shouted, throwing his jacket on the floor. Isabella's heart pounded. She knew what would follow. Mark had not always been this way. Once, he was charming, a man who promised her a life full of love. But those promises had turned into chains. His temper grew worse after he lost money in a failed business deal. And now, every night, Isabella became the punching bag for his frustration. She tried to stay calm for the sake of the baby. "Please, Mark, not tonight. The baby," she whispered. But her plea only fueled his anger. He grabbed her arm, shaking her so hard she nearly fell. Fear shot through her veins, but she bit her lip, determined not to scream. If she screamed, it would only make him angrier. The sound of a phone buzzing on the table distracted Mark. Isabella's eyes followed it, and her heart sank. A message flashed on the screen. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night, Sophia." It was the woman Isabella had suspected for months, her husband's mistress. Mark noticed her gaze, his face twisted with fury. "Don't you dare look at my phone," he roared, slamming it down. His hand raised, and before Isabella could move, a sharp slap echoed across the room. Her head spun, her body staggered, and she collapsed onto the floor. For a moment, silence filled the apartment. Isabella clutched her stomach, terror gripping her soul. She felt a sharp pain deep inside. Was the baby safe? Her tears blurred her vision. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Mark stood over her, breathing heavily. For a flicker of a second, guilt crossed his face. But instead of helping, he stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door behind him, leaving Isabella trembling on the cold floor. Alone, she whispered, "Please, God, protect my baby." Her voice cracked as her body shook uncontrollably. She knew she couldn't endure this much longer. The bruises on her skin could fade, but the scars in her heart were permanent. At that very moment, Isabella made a silent vow. If she survived this night, if her baby survived, she would find a way out. No matter the cost, no matter how hard, she would break free from the monster her husband had become. But fate had already begun writing a different chapter for Isabella's life. And soon, someone unexpected, a man powerful enough to change everything, would step into her world. Yet before that, Isabella would face a tragedy so brutal it would nearly destroy her. Isabella Turner was only 29, yet her eyes carried the weight of someone twice her age. She worked as a nurse in a small clinic before marrying Mark Turner. Her patients loved her kindness, her gentle smile, and her steady hands. She was the kind of woman who stayed late to comfort a crying child or hold an elderly patient's hand. But at home, behind the closed doors of her marriage, that same kindness was crushed daily. Her love story had begun like a fairy tale. Mark was once a successful businessman, full of charm and promises. He swept her off her feet with expensive dinners, roses at her workplace, and endless words of devotion. When he proposed under the glowing lights of Times Square, Isabella believed she had found her forever. She said yes without hesitation, convinced her life would be blessed. But after the wedding, the mask slipped. Mark revealed his true nature, a man consumed by pride, temper, and greed. At first, it was small things. Harsh words, cold silences, nights where he didn't come home. Then came the shouting, the insults, the first push. Isabella forgave him every time, clinging to the hope that the man she loved would return. Instead, his cruelty grew. When she discovered she was pregnant, Isabella thought it would soften him. She imagined fatherhood might awaken his better side. She prayed the news of a baby would bring back his smile. But the opposite happened. Mark saw the pregnancy as a burden. "How will I pay for another mouth when I can barely cover my debts?" he barked the night she told him. Her joy was crushed in an instant. Still, Isabella endured. She told herself she had to be strong for her unborn child. She woke early, cooked his breakfast, ironed his shirts, and ignored the bruises she carefully hid under long sleeves. Even her parents didn't know the full truth. Her mother often asked, "Are you happy, darling?" Isabella always smiled and lied. "Yes, Mom, everything's fine." She couldn't bear to bring shame to her family. But inside, she was breaking. At night, she held her belly and whispered to her baby, "I'll protect you, no matter what. One day, things will be different." Her only comfort was the tiny kicks inside her womb, a reminder she wasn't completely alone. Mark's family only made things worse. His mother accused Isabella of being too weak to handle a husband. His father ignored the bruises, choosing to believe his son could do no wrong. Isabella often felt like she was fighting the whole world alone. Yet despite everything, her heart still carried hope. She believed that somehow life would reward her patience, her sacrifices. Deep down, a quiet voice whispered, "You were not born to suffer like this." That voice kept her alive. But destiny was about to shatter her illusions completely. The betrayal that would soon come wasn't just another slap or insult. It would be public, humiliating, and life-threatening. And it would push Isabella to a breaking point she never imagined she could survive. From the outside, the Turners' life looked enviable. Their apartment towered above Manhattan, with floor-to-ceiling windows that opened to a glittering skyline. At night, the city lights painted the living room with a golden glow. Visitors often gasped at the marble floors, the crystal chandelier, the designer furniture that seemed to whisper wealth. Neighbors assumed Isabella lived like a queen. What no one saw were the shadows hiding behind those walls. Mark insisted on keeping up appearances. He threw parties for clients, hosted dinners for friends, and dragged Isabella along, even when she was weak and exhausted. At these events, Isabella wore the dresses he chose, painted on a smile, and concealed her bruises with heavy makeup. Guests would compliment her beauty, calling her a lucky woman for marrying such a successful man. She nodded politely, swallowing her pain. The apartment itself became a stage, not a home. Mark wanted everyone to believe he was still thriving, that the business losses and debts were just temporary setbacks. He paraded Isabella like a trophy, showing off her pregnancy as proof of his perfect family. Yet once the last guest left, the mask dropped. The silence was broken by his temper, his accusations, his fists slamming against the wall. For Isabella, the setting was both a prison and a disguise. By day, she looked out the window at the bustling city, watching strangers walking freely below. She wondered how many of them carried secrets like hers. By night, she lay awake in a king-sized bed that felt colder than any hospital cot she had ever worked in. She often thought about the contrast between her two worlds. At the clinic where she once worked, the air smelled of disinfectant, the walls were plain, and the pay was small. But there was laughter, kindness, and genuine care. In her luxury apartment, the air reeked of expensive cologne and liquor. The walls were decorated with art worth thousands, yet love was absent. Even her pregnancy, which should have filled the home with joy, became another tool for Mark to manipulate her. When guests asked about the baby, he bragged, "A son will carry my name," while gripping her hand so tightly it hurt. Isabella smiled through clenched teeth, silently praying the child would never inherit his father's cruelty. The contrast grew sharper during holidays. On Christmas Eve, while the city outside sparkled with families gathering, Isabella sat alone by the window. Mark had gone to a business meeting that lasted until dawn. She traced circles on her belly, whispering lullabies to her unborn child, pretending the lights below were stars watching over them. The apartment might have looked glamorous, but Isabella knew the truth. It was a gilded cage. Every corner reminded her of the life she once dreamed of, and the nightmare it had become. And yet this very setting, the wealth, the image, the mask, would one day collapse in front of everyone. Because soon, the secrets Mark tried so hard to hide inside those walls would explode into the public eye. Sophia Miller was the kind of woman who knew how to turn heads the moment she entered a room. At 26, with flowing dark hair, striking green eyes, and a smile that could disarm anyone, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had mastered the art of seduction. But beneath that polished exterior was a heart filled with ambition and greed. She met Mark Turner during one of his business meetings. At first, it was nothing more than casual flirting. Mark, feeling insecure after his financial failures, craved validation. Sophia gave it freely, at a price. She showered him with admiration, calling him a brilliant man, making him feel powerful again. What Isabella endured at home as cruelty, Sophia twisted into charm. Mark quickly became addicted to the attention. Sophia was not interested in love. Love was useless to her. What she wanted was luxury, status, and wealth. She saw Mark not as a partner, but as a stepping stone. In her eyes, Isabella was nothing but an obstacle, a weak, boring wife clinging to a man who no longer cared for her. Sophia wanted more than stolen nights and hotel rooms. She wanted to take Isabella's place completely. Her strategy was simple but effective. She used softness where Isabella showed dignity. She whispered encouragements where Isabella received insults. When Mark complained about his wife being too emotional or too dependent, Sophia leaned in, stroking his ego, assuring him he deserved better. Slowly, she poisoned his mind against his own wife, making Isabella seem like the enemy. Sophia's world was built on appearances. She dressed in designer clothes she could barely afford, charged expensive dinners to Mark's credit card, and filled her Instagram with pictures of champagne glasses, luxury cars, and tropical beaches. She crafted the image of a glamorous life, but in reality, she was living off borrowed money and Mark's crumbling reputation. Behind her sweet smile, she was ruthless. She pressured Mark to give her gifts, jewelry, even a car. "If you really love me, prove it," she'd say, knowing his pride would force him to deliver. When he hesitated, she reminded him of her youth, her beauty, and how easily another man could claim her. Mark, desperate to keep her, gave in again and again. But Sophia was not satisfied with being a mistress. She wanted to replace Isabella entirely. She fantasized about living in the Turner apartment, hosting Mark's parties, wearing his last name, and the baby Isabella carried. To Sophia, that child was nothing but a threat to her ambitions. While Isabella prayed for peace in her small corner of the apartment, Sophia plotted in secret. She believed time was on her side, that soon Mark would choose her over his pregnant wife. What she didn't realize was that her greed and manipulation were setting off a chain of events that would spiral far beyond her control. Because soon, Sophia's desire to destroy Isabella would ignite a fire that consumed not only Isabella's marriage, but also Mark himself. The bruises on Isabella's arms had barely faded when Mark's parents arrived at the apartment. They came unannounced, carrying an air of superiority that filled the room before they even spoke. His mother, Linda Turner, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, scanned Isabella up and down as if inspecting damaged goods. His father, Richard, stood silently behind her, his face unreadable, but his silence heavy with judgment. "Look at you," Linda said coldly, setting her purse on the table. 7 months pregnant and still managing to stress my son to the point of ruin. Do you have any idea what you're doing to him?" Isabella felt her throat tighten. I'm trying my best. Mark has been." Her voice faltered, the truth pressing at the edges of her lips, but fear stopped her. She knew if she revealed the abuse, they wouldn't believe her. Linda cut her off sharply. "You think we don't see it? His business falling apart, his health suffering, and here you are, whining about your little discomforts. A good wife supports her husband, Isabella. You." She pointed at Isabella's swollen belly. "You're just making his life harder." The words pierced deeper than any bruise. Isabella's eyes burned, but she refused to let tears fall in front of them. "I love Mark," she whispered. "I've done everything I can." Richard finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Then do more. Stop complaining. Stop dragging him down." He shook his head with disappointment, as if Isabella were the source of all their troubles. It was the same pattern every time. Mark would lash out, and his parents would swoop in, not to protect Isabella, but to shield their son. To them, he was a man under pressure, a victim of circumstance. Isabella was the problem, the nuisance, the burden. That evening, as she served them dinner with trembling hands, Linda continued her barrage. "When my son married you, he had potential, a bright future. Since then, everything has gone downhill. Sometimes I wonder if you cursed him." Isabella froze. A curse? She wanted to scream, to tell them the truth about their perfect son. But fear chained her silence. Her baby kicked inside her, as if reminding her to stay strong. She swallowed her pain and forced herself to keep moving. After dinner, Linda pulled her aside. Her voice was softer now, but laced with poison. "Men like Mark need strong women. If you can't handle him, he'll find someone who can. Do you understand?" The implication was clear. Isabella thought of Sophia, the young, glamorous woman who had already stolen Mark's attention. The humiliation settled deep into her chest. When they left, the apartment felt colder than ever. Isabella sat alone at the table, staring at the untouched food, her hands resting on her belly. She whispered to her unborn child, They blame me for everything, but I promise, I'll protect you. Even if no one protects me. She didn't know it yet, but this cruel night of blame and humiliation would be the final push. Because soon, the truth about Mark and Sophia would come crashing into the open, and the world would see who was truly guilty. The call came late at night. Mark had been rushed to the hospital after a violent altercation. The details were unclear, but the words, "hammer attack," echoed in Isabella's ears like a nightmare. Her heart raced as she grabbed her coat, clutching her belly protectively. Despite everything he had done to her, despite the bruises still fading on her skin, he was still her husband, the father of her child. She arrived breathless at St. Mary's Hospital, her hair messy, her eyes wide with panic. The bright white lights of the emergency wing made her feel even more exposed, as if the entire world could see her fear. She hurried toward the reception desk. "I'm Isabella Turner," she said urgently. "My husband, Mark Turner. He was brought in. Please, I need to see him." The nurse checked the records and nodded. "He's in surgery. You'll need to wait until the doctor comes out." Isabella sank into one of the plastic chairs, her hands trembling. Every second felt like an hour. She whispered prayers under her breath, begging for her baby to stay calm, for her heart not to give out from the weight of fear. Then came the sound of high heels clicking against the hospital floor. Isabella looked up, and her stomach dropped. Sophia Miller walked in, dressed as if she had stepped out of a magazine photo shoot. Her fitted dress, her perfect hair, and her confident smile contrasted sharply with Isabella's pale, weary face. Sophia walked straight to the nurse's desk. "I'm Sophia Miller," she said smoothly. "I'm Mr. Turner's partner. I need to see him immediately." The word partner struck Isabella like a blade. She shot up from her seat, her voice shaking. "I'm his wife. I'm carrying his child. You have no right." Sophia turned, her eyes glittering with cruel satisfaction. "Wife in name only," she said softly, just loud enough for Isabella to hear. "Mark doesn't want you here. He wants me." The nurse looked uncertain, caught between two women claiming the same man. Sophia pulled out her phone, showing a string of photos, herself with Mark, laughing in restaurants, kissing in front of mirrors. "He loves me," she declared. "Ask him yourself when he wakes up." Humiliation burned through Isabella's chest. The nurse hesitated, then nodded reluctantly toward Sophia. "Visiting is limited to one person at a time. You'll have to wait, Mrs. Turner." Mrs. Turner. The title felt like a cruel joke now. Isabella stood frozen as Sophia strutted past her into the restricted ward, her heels echoing like victory drums. Isabella stumbled back into her chair, tears spilling down her face. The waiting room blurred before her eyes. She pressed her hand to her belly, whispering to her unborn child, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." For the first time, she realized the full extent of her isolation. Even here in the hospital she was powerless, invisible, erased. And deep inside, something broke. Because if Sophia could steal her place at her husband's hospital bed, what else was she capable of taking away? The next morning, Isabella returned to the hospital, her body aching from a sleepless night. She had hoped the chaos of the previous evening was just a cruel misunderstanding, that the staff would finally recognize her as Mark's wife. With quiet determination, she walked toward the recovery ward, carrying a small bag of clothes she had packed for him. But the moment she entered the corridor, her heart stopped. Sophia was already there, seated gracefully beside Mark's hospital bed. She was holding his hand, whispering into his ear, her face arranged into an expression of tender concern. From a distance, it looked like the picture of a devoted wife caring for her injured husband. Isabella froze in the doorway. "Mark," she whispered. Mark's eyes flickered open, his expression groggy from the medication. When he saw Isabella, he frowned, annoyance flashing across his face. "Why are you here?" he muttered. His voice was weak, but the rejection in it was strong enough to cut Isabella's heart in two. Sophia leaned closer to him, brushing his hair back. "Don't get upset, darling. She just doesn't understand her place," she cooed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Then she turned her head, her eyes locking on Isabella like daggers. "He doesn't need stress right now. Why don't you leave?" "I'm his wife," Isabella said firmly, though her voice shook. "I have every right to be here." She stepped forward, clutching the bag against her chest. Sophia stood up, her heels clicking against the floor as she moved closer. She lowered her voice so only Isabella could hear. "Wife on paper, maybe, but look at him. He doesn't even want you here. You're nothing to him now. Nothing." Isabella's face burned. She wanted to scream, to expose the lies, but when she looked at Mark, all she saw was cold indifference. He didn't defend her. He didn't even look ashamed. Instead, he turned his face away, as if her presence was a burden. Sophia smirked, then raised her voice for the room to hear. "Doctor, could you please ask hospital security to ensure only family is allowed inside? Mark needs rest." The doctor, unaware of the toxic game unfolding, nodded sympathetically. "We'll limit visitors to immediate family. Only his partner should remain for now." His eyes landed on Sophia, who smiled sweetly, then on Isabella, who stood frozen, trembling with humiliation. "Partner." The word echoed in Isabella's ears like thunder. Her hands tightened around the bag until her knuckles turned white. She wanted to argue, to shout that she was his wife carrying his child, but the silence of the room crushed her voice. Finally, she turned away, her vision blurred with tears. The bag slipped from her hands and fell to the floor with a soft thud. She walked out slowly, each step heavier than the last, as Sophia's triumphant gaze burned into her back. Out in the hallway, Isabella pressed against the cold wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor. She wrapped her arms around her belly, whispering, "I'm still your mother. I'll fight for you." But inside, she felt smaller than ever. Because if her husband chose another woman over her in front of everyone, what hope did she have left to hold on to? The apartment felt emptier than ever when Isabella returned that night. The city outside was alive with glowing lights and rushing cars, but inside her home, silence pressed down like a heavy blanket. She dropped her keys on the counter, her hands trembling, and sank onto the couch. For a moment, she just stared at the wall, unable to move, unable to breathe. Images of the hospital replayed in her mind. Mark lying in bed, his hand clasped in Sophia's. Sophia's smug smile, the doctor addressing Sophia as if she were the wife. Every detail replayed like a cruel movie she couldn't escape. Finally, Isabella buried her face in her hands and let the sobs come. The tears poured uncontrollably, soaking her sleeves. Her shoulders shook as she cried harder than she ever had before. She cried for the love she once believed in, for the child who deserved better, for the woman she no longer recognized in the mirror. She looked around the apartment, marble floors, polished furniture, expensive art pieces Mark had once bragged about. None of it mattered. None of it could heal the wound in her heart. This wasn't a home. It was a cage built of lies and cruelty. Dragging herself up, she walked to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. Her body ached from pregnancy, but the pain inside her chest was worse. She placed both hands on her swollen belly, whispering to her unborn baby, "What kind of world am I bringing you into? How can I protect you when I can't even protect myself?" The baby kicked softly, a small reminder of life growing within her. It gave her a moment of comfort, but also sharpened her fear. What if Mark's violence one day reached the child? What if Sophia succeeded in replacing her completely, erasing her from the picture? She stood and walked to the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at her was pale, her eyes red and swollen, her lips trembling. She barely recognized herself. Once, she had been full of dreams, a nurse who wanted to heal others, a woman who believed in love. Now she was a shadow, clinging to survival. "I can't live like this anymore," she whispered to the reflection. "Something has to change." But how? Where would she go? With no money, no support, and a baby on the way, the future looked like an endless tunnel with no light at the end. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. For a fleeting second, hope sparked. Maybe it was Mark, finally apologizing. But when she picked it up, the screen showed a message from an unknown number. It was a picture of Sophia and Mark together, smiling in the hospital room. The caption read, "This is what love looks like." Isabella dropped the phone, her knees buckling as she sank to the floor. The sobs returned, raw and guttural, echoing through the apartment. She pressed her face into the carpet, clutching her stomach as if holding on to the only thing keeping her alive. Alone in the darkness, Isabella realized she was at her lowest point. But what she didn't know was that this breaking moment would soon open the door for an unexpected ally, someone who would change her fate forever. The morning after her breakdown, Isabella sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of cold tea. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her body weak, her spirit fractured. She felt like a ghost drifting through her own life, powerless and invisible. The knock on the door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment, fear gripped her. What if Mark had sent someone to silence her? She hesitated, then slowly opened the door. Standing there was a man she hadn't seen in years. Tall, with kind brown eyes and a neatly pressed suit, James Carter looked both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. "Isabella?" he asked gently. Her breath caught. "James? James Carter?" He nodded, offering a small smile. It's been a long time. James had been her friend back in college, a law student who often studied with her late into the night at the campus library. They had lost touch after she married Mark, swept into his world of business dinners and obligations. Now James stood before her, older, more confident, but with the same warmth she remembered. "May I come in?" he asked. She hesitated, embarrassed by the mess of tissues scattered around and the heavy air of despair that lingered in the apartment, but she stepped aside. "Of course." James walked in, his eyes scanning the luxury apartment with a frown. "This place looks expensive," he said carefully, "but it doesn't look like a home." Isabella lowered her gaze, ashamed. She sat down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "What are you doing here?" "I heard," he said softly, "about Mark, about the hospital, and about you." Her eyes widened. "Who told you?" "A mutual friend saw you at St. Mary's. They said you looked broken. I couldn't ignore that. Isabella, I'm a lawyer now. I deal with cases of abuse, family disputes. I help people escape situations like—" He stopped himself, not wanting to push too hard. "Like the one you're in." The word abuse made Isabella flinch. For years she had avoided naming it, convincing herself it was just anger, stress, a phase. But hearing it out loud shattered the denial she had built. Her voice trembled. "James, I don't know what to do. I can't leave. I have no money, no power. His family hates me, and Sophia." Her throat closed around the name. James leaned forward, his tone firm but gentle. "You are not powerless. You are not alone. I can help you. I can make sure you and your baby are safe. But you have to trust me. You have to take the first step." Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were different. Not only grief, there was something else. A flicker of hope. She searched his face, desperate to believe. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. James smiled softly. "Because I remember the girl who believed in everyone else's healing. Now it's time someone believes in yours." For the first time in weeks, Isabella felt a breath of air fill her lungs, as if the cage around her heart had cracked. She didn't know it yet, but this reunion with James would become the turning point that changed everything. James didn't waste time. The day after his visit, he returned to Isabella's apartment with a folder tucked under his arm. His expression was serious, his tone calm but urgent. "Isabella," he said, placing the folder on the table, "I need you to see this." She hesitated before sitting across from him, her hands resting protectively on her belly. "What is it?" "Proof," James replied simply. He opened the folder to reveal documents, bank statements, legal notices, and photographs. Isabella's eyes widened as she scanned the papers. The numbers blurred together at first, but James explained. "Mark's business isn't just failing, it's drowning. He's hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Loans, unpaid contractors, credit cards maxed out. He's been hiding it all." Isabella felt her stomach twist. She had suspected money was tight, but Mark always dismissed her concerns. "He told me everything was under control," she whispered. James shook his head. "It's not, and that's not the worst of it." He flipped to another set of documents, hotel receipts, transactions for jewelry, luxury items. Each one was signed with Mark's name. These weren't for you. They were for her. Her throat tightened as she stared at the evidence of Sophia's existence carved into black and white ink. Every dinner bill, every hotel stay, every diamond bracelet, it all screamed betrayal. James continued, his voice steady. "Sophia isn't just his mistress. She's manipulating him. She knows about his debts, and she's using it to bleed him dry. I even found a witness who saw her with another man last month, a man rumored to be part of the same loan sharks Mark owes money to." Isabella's head spun. "You're saying she's not only taking his money, but she's connected to the people who attacked him?" "It's a strong possibility," James confirmed. "Think about it. Mark gets attacked with a hammer. Yet Sophia is right there at the hospital, claiming to be his partner. Too convenient, isn't it? Isabella's hands trembled as she closed the folder. The betrayal felt like a physical weight crushing her chest. She had endured Mark's cruelty, his parents' blame, Sophia's humiliation, and now she learned it was all tied together in a web of lies and greed. James leaned closer, lowering his voice. Listen to me. You've been made to feel powerless, but the truth gives us leverage. If we gather enough evidence, we can expose Sophia. We can even use this against Mark in court. You can win your freedom, Isabella. You can protect your child. Her eyes filled with tears, but not just from pain. For the first time, she felt like she had a weapon in her hands, not a physical one, but the power of truth. What do I have to do? She whispered. James's gaze was steady, reassuring. Let me handle the investigation. All I need from you is courage. Don't give up, no matter what they throw at you. I promise. I won't let you face this alone. Isabella pressed her hand to her belly. Her baby kicked, as if echoing James's words. And in that moment, she felt something she thought she had lost forever. The strength to fight. What she didn't realize was that this fight would uncover secrets darker than she ever imagined, and put her life in even greater danger. Sophia Miller had always been calculating, but now her ambitions grew sharper than ever. With Mark lying in a hospital bed, weak and dependent, she saw her chance to strike. Isabella might still carry his last name, but Sophia was determined to erase her completely and take everything for herself. At the hospital, Sophia sat by Mark's side, her voice soft and poisonous. Darling, you need to focus on recovery, but you also need to think about your future. Do you really want that woman controlling your money? Your legacy? Mark groaned, his head heavy from painkillers. She's still my wife, he muttered. Sophia leaned closer, brushing her lips against his ear. She's your problem, not your partner. She's weak, Mark. She's dragging you down. But me? I can help you rebuild. I can help you rise again. All you need to do is trust me. Her words slid into his mind like venom. Every insecurity, every failure, she twisted into blame against Isabella. And slowly, Mark began to believe. But Sophia didn't stop there. She contacted Mark's parents, knowing exactly how to manipulate their pride. Over tea in their suburban home, she played the role of the caring woman. I only want what's best for Mark, she said sweetly. Isabella doesn't understand him. She doesn't support him the way a real wife should. He needs strength beside him, not weakness. Linda Turner, who had never hidden her disdain for Isabella, nodded approvingly. You're right, dear. Isabella has been nothing but a disappointment. Perhaps you are the woman my son truly deserves. Sophia smiled, hiding her satisfaction behind a polite sip of tea. Another pawn secured. Behind the scenes, she went further. Using Mark's credit cards, she transferred money into her own accounts, disguising the withdrawals as medical expenses and business costs. She whispered into Mark's ear about signing documents that would grant her power of attorney, convincing him it was only temporary. His judgment clouded by pain, drugs, and flattery, he signed without hesitation. Meanwhile, Isabella was left in the dark. When she tried to visit Mark, Sophia intercepted her, claiming he needed rest. When Isabella called his phone, Sophia answered, her voice dripping with condescension. He doesn't want to talk to you, Isabella. He has me now. Accept it. The humiliation cut deep, but Isabella refused to let it show. She went home, clutching James's folder of evidence, reminding herself she had an ally. Yet deep inside, doubt gnawed at her. How could she fight someone as cunning, as ruthless as Sophia? Sophia, however, underestimated one thing. She believed Isabella was broken beyond repair, a fragile woman too weak to resist. But pain can transform into power, and humiliation into determination. For now, Sophia basked in her illusion of victory. She strutted through the hospital halls like a queen, convinced Isabella was finished. What she didn't know was that James was already unraveling her schemes, and soon, the empire she was building on, lies would begin to collapse. Isabella had always believed that people would see the truth if she stayed honest, but the world around her seemed determined to twist her story. In the weeks following Mark's attack, whispers began spreading through the community. Neighbors, colleagues, even distant relatives, all had their own version of events, and none of them favored her. At the grocery store, Isabella felt the stares before she even reached the checkout line. Two women in front of her leaned close, their voices low but sharp enough for her to hear. That's her. the one who can't even keep her husband. Imagine being pregnant and still losing him to another woman. The other woman shook her head. Some wives just don't try hard enough. Men don't wander unless something's missing at home. Isabella's cheeks burned. She lowered her gaze, clutching the handle of her cart tighter, fighting back tears. Even friends she once trusted seemed to turn against her. One afternoon, she called a former coworker, hoping for comfort. Instead, she was met with thinly veiled judgment. "Isabella, maybe you should reflect on what you did wrong. Men don't act out for no reason. You must have pushed him too far." The words stung like knives. She wanted to scream. "He hit me. He betrayed me. He left me bleeding while carrying his child." But her voice caught in her throat. She was exhausted from explaining, from defending herself to people who had already decided she was guilty. Even at her parents' church, where she had once felt safe, the gossip was relentless. A group of parishioners whispered about her during service. "Poor Mark," one of them murmured, "burdened with a wife who doesn't know her place. And now he's sick, fighting for his life, while she looks perfectly fine." Perfectly fine. They didn't see the sleepless nights, the silent tears, the constant fear gnawing at her chest. They didn't see the bruises she covered, the humiliation she endured, the loneliness that hollowed her out. Back at her apartment, Isabella collapsed onto the couch, her hands trembling as she held her phone. Social media was worse. Photos of Sophia and Mark surfaced online. Sophia had posted them shamelessly, captions full of love and devotion. Underneath, comments poured in. "What a beautiful couple." Finally, he found someone who truly loves him. That poor wife should just move on. Each comment felt like a dagger. Isabella's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the phone. She tossed it aside, burying her face into her hands, sobs racking her body. She was drowning not just in Mark's betrayal, but in society's cruelty. Everyone seemed eager to blame her, to paint her as the villain in a story where she was the victim. Yet in the middle of her despair, a small voice inside her whispered, "The truth will come out. Hold on." Isabella pressed her hand against her belly, feeling the baby's gentle kick. That tiny movement reminded her she still had something worth fighting for. But before the world could see the truth, she would have to endure one more blow, one so cruel it would nearly take everything from her. It happened on a rainy afternoon, the kind of day when the sky itself seemed to mourn. Isabella had gone to the hospital again, determined to check on Mark despite the humiliation she had endured. She thought if she kept showing up, if she kept proving her loyalty, maybe someone, anyone, would finally acknowledge her place. But as soon as she stepped off the elevator, she felt the tension in the air. Sophia was already there, standing in the hallway with a bouquet of roses and a smug smile. "Well, if it isn't the unwanted guest," Sophia sneered. Isabella tightened her grip on her purse, trying to stay calm. "I'm here to see my husband." "Your husband?" Sophia's laugh echoed sharply. "Wake up, Isabella. He doesn't want you. He never did. You're just the mistake he's too weak to erase." The cruelty of the words struck Isabella like a blow, but she stood her ground. "You can't erase me. I carry his child." She placed a hand protectively over her belly, her voice trembling but firm. For the first time, Sophia's smile faltered, a flicker of envy crossing her face. She leaned closer, her tone dropping to a hiss. "That baby is the only thing keeping you relevant. Without it, you're nothing." Before Isabella could react, Sophia shoved her. The force was sudden, sharp, and brutal. Isabella's body lurched backward, her feet slipping on the polished hospital floor. She crashed against the wall, pain exploding through her lower abdomen. Her scream tore through the hallway as she crumpled to the ground, clutching her stomach. Nurses rushed over immediately, alarms blaring as Isabella's cries filled the air. "Help me. Please, help my baby," she sobbed, her voice breaking with terror. The world spun around her as gurneys and flashing lights blurred in her vision. Sophia, feigning innocence, stepped back, her expression masked with false shock. "I didn't mean to," she tripped. "It wasn't my fault," she cried, her voice high and desperate. But her eyes betrayed her, cold and unrepentant. Isabella was rushed into the emergency ward, her hands clutching her belly as if sheer willpower could protect the fragile life inside her. Every bump of the stretcher sent another wave of agony through her body. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Please, baby, stay with me. Don't leave me." The doctors worked frantically. Hours felt like days. Isabella drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind replaying Sophia's words, the shove, the pain. When she finally opened her eyes, she was in a dim recovery room, an IV in her arm and monitors beeping steadily around her. A nurse stood nearby, her expression soft. "You're safe," she said gently. "And so is your baby. It was close, but you both made it." Relief crashed over Isabella in waves. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, thanking God, thanking fate, thanking whatever force had spared her child. But alongside relief came fury. Sophia had tried to take everything from her, her dignity, her marriage, and now her child. And in that moment, Isabella made a silent vow. She would no longer remain silent. She would fight back, no matter the cost. When Isabella opened her eyes again, the sterile smell of the hospital surrounded her. The soft beeping of machines confirmed that both she and her baby had survived the terrifying ordeal. Relief washed over her, but the weight of what had happened pressed heavily on her chest. She felt fragile, like glass cracked in too many places to mend. Then she saw him. James was sitting quietly in the chair beside her bed, his suit jacket folded neatly on his lap. His eyes, tired but gentle, lifted as soon as she stirred. "You're awake," he said softly, standing to approach her. Isabella's throat tightened. She hadn't expected anyone to stay. Mark hadn't come. Sophia certainly wouldn't. But James was here. "I heard what happened," James continued, his voice steady but tinged with anger. "They told me you collapsed. Isabella, did she do this?" Tears welled in Isabella's eyes as the memory replayed. Sophia's shove, the searing pain, the terror of losing her baby. She nodded silently, unable to speak without breaking. James's jaw tightened, his calm composure cracking for the first time. "That woman will not get away with this. I promise you." Isabella's lips trembled. I thought I was going to lose my baby. I thought it was over." Her voice cracked into sobs, and she buried her face in her hands. Without hesitation, James sat on the edge of the bed, gently prying her hands away. "Look at me," he said firmly. She lifted her tear-filled eyes to his, and for the first time in weeks, she saw no judgment, no disdain, only compassion. "You are stronger than you realize," James told her. "Sophia wants to break you because she knows the truth. You are not weak. You survived Mark's abuse. You survived being humiliated and blamed, and now you survived her attempt to destroy you and your child. That isn't weakness, Isabella. That's strength." His words sank into her like medicine, soothing an open wound. For so long she had been told she was nothing, by Mark, by his parents, by society. But here was someone reminding her that she was more than the pain she endured. "You don't have to fight this alone," James continued. "I will be your voice when you can't speak. I will stand in front of you when they try to knock you down. All I ask is that you hold on, for your baby and for yourself." Isabella's tears flowed freely, but this time they weren't only of despair. They were tears of release, of hope flickering back to life. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the gentle movement of her child. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to," James said, offering her a reassuring smile. "Just promise me one thing. Don't give up. Not now. Not ever." In that quiet hospital room, Isabella felt things shift inside her. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She wasn't just Mark's battered wife or Sophia's target. She was a mother, a woman, and now someone with an ally who believed in her. And that belief would become the spark that ignited her fight for justice. James returned to the hospital the next day with a fire in his eyes. Isabella, still recovering, sat upright in her bed as he entered, holding a thick envelope. Her heart skipped. "What is that?" she asked cautiously. "Proof," James replied. "And this time, it's not just numbers on a page. It's something they can't deny." He spread several photographs across the blanket. They were grainy stills pulled from security footage inside the hospital. Isabella leaned closer, her breath catching as she recognized Sophia in every frame. The first image showed Sophia walking briskly down the corridor minutes before Isabella had been attacked. Another captured her lingering near the restricted ward, glancing nervously over her shoulder. And the most damning shot of all, Sophia shoving past Isabella in the hallway just before Isabella collapsed. Isabella's chest tightened as the memories returned, the shove, the pain, the terror of nearly losing her baby. Her fingers shook as she touched the photo. This is her. This is what she did to me." James nodded grimly. The cameras don't lie. She's been claiming innocence, painting herself as your husband's savior. But these images prove otherwise. She wasn't just present, she was involved. But will anyone believe it? Isabella whispered, her voice heavy with doubt. Mark's parents already despise me. The world sees her as his partner. I'm the one everyone blames. James placed a reassuring hand on hers. That's why we're building a case, step by step. First, we establish her presence. Next, we expose her motives. And finally, we reveal the damage she's done. To Mark, to you, to everything she touched. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes, but this time they weren't only from pain. For the first time, she felt the scales beginning to tip in her favor. Evidence. Real. Undeniable evidence. As if reading her thoughts, James continued. I also pulled financial records linked to her. Large withdrawals from Mark's accounts, timed suspiciously close to her spending sprees. Jewelry, vacations, even a down payment on a car. She's bleeding him dry, Isabella, and soon he'll have nothing left, except the damage she's caused. Isabella's lips trembled. And yet, he still chooses her. James sighed, his voice steady but sad, because he's blinded by her manipulation. But when the truth is revealed in court, no one, not even Mark, will be able to deny it. Silence hung between them for a moment. Isabella clutched the photos to her chest, her heart pounding. For weeks she had felt powerless, invisible, erased. But now, with these images in her hands, she felt something new stirring inside her. Validation. James leaned forward, his eyes firm. This is just the beginning. With this, we can move forward. But you must be ready, Isabella. The fight will get uglier before it gets better. Sophia won't go down without trying to drag you through the dirt. Isabella drew a shaky breath, her hand resting protectively on her belly. Let her try, she whispered. For my child, I'll face whatever she throws at me. James gave a small, proud smile. That's the spirit, and I'll be right beside you when the storm hits. Neither of them realized how quickly that storm was coming, or how dangerous Sophia's retaliation would become. Sophia Miller was not the type of woman to retreat quietly. When James began digging into her finances, and the hospital cameras placed her near Isabella's collapse, she knew the walls were closing in. But instead of panicking, Sophia did what she did best. She went on the attack. Her first move was subtle. She hired a publicist, the kind who specialized in controlling narratives. Soon, glossy photos of her and Mark appeared on social media, accompanied by carefully crafted captions, standing strong for the man I love, praying for his recovery, together forever. The images went viral. To the outside world, Sophia was the devoted partner, the beautiful woman sacrificing everything for her injured lover. And Isabella? She was painted as the bitter, abandoned wife clinging to a marriage already dead. But Sophia didn't stop with appearances. She paid gossip bloggers to publish articles claiming Isabella had been unstable for years. Rumors spread that Isabella had violent mood swings, that she had been mentally abusive toward Mark, that her pregnancy was just a desperate attempt to trap him. None of it was true, but in a world that thrived on scandal, truth mattered less than the story people wanted to believe. Within days, Isabella felt the sting. At the grocery store, strangers whispered as she passed. Online, comments piled beneath fabricated headlines. Wife from hell, Isabella Turner's dark secrets. She tried to ignore it, but the words cut deep. Poor Mark. No wonder he left her. Sophia is a saint for saving him. Her phone buzzed with messages from acquaintances she hadn't heard from in years. Some pretended to be concerned, others demanded answers. One text from an old coworker read bluntly, "Is it true you attacked him first? That's why he cheated?" Isabella dropped the phone, her chest heaving with rage and despair. She wanted to scream at the world, to beg them to see the truth, but every attempt seemed useless. Sophia's lies were louder, shinier, easier to believe. At the hospital, the humiliation grew worse. Nurses who once smiled at Isabella now looked at her with pity or suspicion. One even whispered, "Poor Mark," stuck with her. Sophia's poison had seeped everywhere. Back at her apartment, Isabella collapsed on the couch, burying her face in her hands. "How can I fight this?" she sobbed. "She's destroying me." James arrived later that evening, finding her trembling with frustration. He listened quietly, then placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Sophia's smart, but she's reckless. Lies spread quickly, yes, but they also crumble quickly when the truth is revealed. Trust me, Isabella, we're gathering proof. Every rumor she spreads will backfire when we expose her. Isabella wiped her tears, but her heart remained heavy. She thought of her baby, of the future hanging in the balance. Could she endure this storm long enough to reach the truth? Sophia, meanwhile, poured herself a glass of champagne, scrolling through the comments praising her. In her mind, victory was inevitable. But what she didn't know was that her next move would cross a line too far, one that would turn the tide against her forever. The apartment was quiet, except for the ticking of the wall clock. Isabella sat on the edge of her bed, her face pale, her hands resting on her swollen belly. The weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders. Every headline, every cruel comment, every whisper in the streets told her she was finished. She thought about disappearing, packing a small bag, leaving New York, starting over in some small town where no one knew her name. She imagined holding her baby in her arms, far away from Mark, Sophia, and the endless judgment. It would be easier to hide, easier to surrender. But the other side of her heart screamed louder. If she left without fighting, Sophia would win. Her child would grow up in a world where lies were accepted as truth. And Mark, her abusive husband, would never face the consequences of what he had done. The thought made her stomach twist with rage. She stood and walked slowly to the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked fragile. Yes, but there was something else in her reflection too. Strength. It had always been there, buried beneath the fear. She touched her bruised cheek, then placed both hands over her belly. "I can't give up," she whispered. "Not for me, for you." The baby kicked softly, as if answering her vow. That night, James came by again, bringing her food and updates on the case. He found her sitting straighter, her eyes clearer than before. "You look different," he said. "I made a decision," Isabella told him. "I'm not running, I'm not hiding. Sophia wants to destroy me, and Mark thinks he owns me. But they're wrong. I will fight. For my baby, I will fight with everything I have left." James's lips curved into a small smile. "That's the Isabella I remember, the one who never backed down, no matter how hard things got." Still, fear lingered in her chest. "But what if I fail? What if no one believes me?" James leaned forward, his voice steady. "Then we'll make them believe. We'll use the truth, the evidence, and the law. But the most important weapon you have is your courage. Sophia thrives on your silence. Break it, and she loses her power." Isabella nodded, tears filling her eyes. But this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of determination. She realized that every humiliation, every scar, every sleepless night had been forging her into something stronger. Later, alone in the quiet of her room, Isabella wrote a letter to her unborn child. Her pen moved slowly, but her words were steady. "I promise you, no matter how dark the world gets, I will never stop fighting for you. You are my reason, my hope, my future, and together we will rise." She folded the letter and tucked it into her nightstand, her vow sealed. For the first time in months, she lay down with a sense of purpose instead of dread. Because Isabella Turner had chosen her path, and it was not surrender. It was war. The next morning, Isabella stood before the mirror with a determination she hadn't felt in years. The woman staring back at her no longer looked like a victim. Her bruises had faded, and her eyes, though still shadowed by pain, carried a fire that couldn't be extinguished. She realized she could not walk into battle looking like the broken wife Sophia wanted the world to see. She needed to rise, strong, composed, and unshakable. James noticed the change too. When he arrived to discuss the upcoming legal steps, Isabella greeted him at the door with her hair brushed, her posture straight, and a calm confidence in her voice. "I'm ready," she said simply. But she didn't stop at words. Isabella booked an appointment at a small salon on the corner of the street. The stylist trimmed away the split ends and shaped her hair into a sleek, professional cut. Her face, free of heavy makeup used to hide bruises, was fresh and radiant. She wore a modest but elegant maternity dress, one that highlighted her strength rather than her fragility. For the first time in months, she looked in the mirror and didn't see defeat. She saw resilience. Her transformation wasn't only on the outside. Isabella began preparing mentally too. James spent hours walking her through the legal process, explaining what to expect. "Sophia will try to smear your name. Mark will try to deny everything. But you must stay calm. You must answer with truth, not emotion." At first, Isabella doubted she could control her emotions in the face of such cruelty. But with each practice session, she grew steadier. She rehearsed her statements, her tone firm but graceful. Every word was a reminder that she wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for her child's future. To strengthen her resolve, Isabella returned to her roots. She visited her parents, who had long worried in silence. Her mother wept as Isabella spoke openly about the abuse, the humiliation, the lies. "I stayed quiet because I didn't want to bring shame to you," Isabella confessed. "But silence almost cost me everything." Her father, normally reserved, placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "You are our daughter. You don't bring shame, you bring courage, and you don't fight alone anymore." Their words filled her with the final piece of strength she needed. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. When Isabella walked out of her parents' home that evening, she felt taller, stronger. The city lights no longer seemed mocking. They looked like sparks, mirroring the fire in her chest. Sophia had tried to paint her as a weak, discarded wife. But the woman preparing to step into court was no longer weak, and no longer discarded. She was Isabella Turner, mother, survivor, fighter. And though the road ahead would be brutal, she was ready to face it with every ounce of strength inside her. Because now, the world would no longer see Sophia's lies, they would see Isabella's truth. The courthouse loomed like a fortress, its stone walls casting long shadows across the crowded steps. Isabella stood at the bottom, her heart pounding as she looked up. For weeks, she had been preparing for this moment with James. Now the day had come. Today, she would no longer be silent. James walked beside her, carrying a thick briefcase. "Remember," he whispered, "Sophia will try to provoke you. Don't let her. Stay calm, stay strong." Isabella nodded, smoothing the front of her navy blue maternity dress. Her hands trembled, but she steadied them by resting them on her belly. "For you," she thought, "for my child." Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Reporters filled the benches, pens scratching furiously as they waited for the scandal to unfold. Cameras weren't allowed, but everyone knew the story would make headlines by evening. Then Sophia entered. She wore a cream-colored dress and a pearl necklace, her hair styled in soft curls. She looked every inch the devoted partner, her eyes glistening with feigned sorrow. She walked dramatically to Mark's side, slipping her hand into his as though she were the grieving wife. Mark, pale and weak from his injuries, leaned on her, letting the world believe her act. Whispers filled the room. "She's so beautiful. Poor man, what he must be going through. That wife. What kind of woman lets this happen?" Isabella heard every word, but she lifted her chin. She would not shrink today. The judge called the court to order. Sophia's attorney stood first, painting her as the heroine of the story. "My client has been nothing but supportive," he declared. "She has stood by Mr. Turner in his darkest hour, while his estranged wife has only caused chaos. Mrs. Turner's instability is well documented, and today we will show that she is unfit to be a mother or a partner." Gasps rippled through the room. Isabella's stomach knotted, but James squeezed her hand under the table, grounding her. Then it was Isabella's turn. She rose slowly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I am Isabella Turner," she began. "I am his wife, and I am the mother of his child. For years I stayed silent while I was abused, humiliated, and blamed. But silence nearly cost me my baby and my life. Today I speak not for revenge but for truth." Her words hung in the air, quiet but powerful. For the first time, the whispers stopped. James presented the evidence. Bank records showing Sophia draining Mark's accounts, photos of Sophia flaunting luxury goods, and, most damning of all, the hospital security footage. The images of Sophia shoving Isabella into the wall flashed across the courtroom screen. Gasps erupted once again, but this time they were directed at Sophia. Sophia's face blanched, but she quickly forced tears into her eyes, clutching Mark's arm. "It's not what it looks like," she cried. "She's twisting everything." But the seed of doubt had already been planted. Isabella, standing tall with her hands on her belly, looked nothing like the unstable woman Sophia had described. She looked like a mother protecting her child. And for the first time, the court began to see through Sophia's mask. The courtroom was already tense when the judge announced, "The court will now hear testimony from a new witness." Murmurs spread through the room. Neither side had expected this. Isabella's heart skipped as a tall, broad-shouldered man was escorted in by 2 officers. His hands were cuffed, his face weathered, his eyes cold. James leaned close and whispered, "That's him, the man who attacked Mark." Gasps filled the courtroom as the man was sworn in. He spoke with a gravelly voice, each word deliberate. "My name is Victor Hayes, and yes, I was the one who hit Mark Turner with a hammer." Chaos erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously, the judge banged the gavel for order, and Mark turned pale, clutching Sophia's arm. Victor continued calmly, "I didn't do it because of Mark himself. I did it because I was paid." The room fell silent. Every ear strained to hear the next words. "Paid by whom?" the prosecutor asked. Victor's eyes shifted, landing directly on Sophia. "By her, Sophia Miller." Gasps filled the room again. Sophia leapt to her feet, her voice high and panicked. "That's a lie. He's trying to frame me." But Victor didn't flinch. "She promised me cash if I scared him, if I made him suffer but not die. She said Mark owed people money and she wanted to teach him a lesson. She gave me half up front and said I'd get the rest after it was done. But when the police closed in, she disappeared. Never paid me the rest." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Sophia's carefully crafted image began to crack under the weight of Victor's testimony. James seized the moment. "Your Honor, we have corroborating evidence. Bank withdrawals from Mark's account on the same day Victor claims he was paid. The money was funneled through a shell account linked directly to Sophia Miller." The prosecutor presented the documents, and the judge studied them closely. Sophia's attorney stammered, struggling to mount a defense. Sophia's mask slipped. She turned to Mark, her eyes wide with desperation. "Don't believe him, Mark. He's lying. You know I would never." But Mark's face was pale, his lips trembling. For the first time, doubt clouded his eyes. Victor leaned forward, his voice steady. "I don't care if you believe me or not. I've got nothing left to lose, but I know the truth. And the truth is she used me to do her dirty work, just like she's been using all of you." Isabella sat frozen, her heart pounding. The moment felt surreal. For months, she had been painted as the villain, the weak wife, the problem. But here it was, proof that Sophia wasn't just a manipulator. She was dangerous, ruthless, and criminal. Sophia collapsed back into her chair, tears smearing her perfect makeup. But for once, the courtroom wasn't moved by her performance. They had seen the mask fall. The judge's gavel struck again. "Order. This testimony changes the scope of these proceedings. We will reconvene with further investigation." Isabella exhaled shakily, gripping James's hand. The truth had finally broken through the lies, but the war was far from over. The courtroom was buzzing the next morning. Reporters crowded outside, cameras flashing, voices shouting questions. Inside, tension wrapped around everyone like a noose. After Victor's testimony, all eyes now turned to Mark Turner. Would he defend Sophia, or would the truth finally come out? Mark sat hunched at the defendant's table, his once confident posture replaced by slumped shoulders. His face was pale, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead. He looked less like the proud businessman he once claimed to be, and more like a man cornered by his own lies. The judge called him to the stand. Slowly, Mark rose, his footsteps heavy as he made his way forward. He sat, adjusted the microphone, and avoided Isabella's eyes. The prosecutor began. "Mr. Turner, you have heard the testimony of Victor Hayes and seen the financial records presented. Do you deny that you were unfaithful to your wife?" Mark hesitated, his lips parting, but no words coming. The silence was deafening. Finally, with a trembling voice, he muttered, "No, I don't deny it." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Isabella closed her eyes, her hand tightening around the edge of the bench. Though she had known the truth all along, hearing him admit it aloud cut her like a knife. The prosecutor pressed on. "And do you deny that you gave Sophia Miller access to your financial accounts?" Mark's jaw clenched. His voice cracked as he answered, "No. I gave her everything. I thought she loved me." Laughter and whispers spread through the crowd. The mighty Mark Turner, once seen as untouchable, now looked pathetic, a fool undone by greed and lust. The prosecutor's questions grew sharper. "Mr. Turner, is it true that your company is bankrupt, that you are drowning in debt?" Mark lowered his head. "Yes, it's true. I lost it all. Bad investments, reckless spending. I couldn't stop. And when I thought I had nothing left, Sophia was there, telling me I could rebuild. I believed her." Sophia's attorney tried to object, but the damage was already done. The courtroom had heard it. Infidelity, financial ruin, blind devotion to a manipulative mistress. James seized the moment. He stood, his voice steady but powerful. Your Honor, this testimony proves what we have been saying from the start. Isabella Turner is not the villain here. She is a victim of her husband's abuse, his betrayal, and Sophia Miller's schemes. The world has been fed lies, but today the truth speaks for itself. Mark finally looked at Isabella. His eyes, once full of arrogance, now carried something else. Regret. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Isabella met his gaze only briefly before turning away. For her, his confession brought no comfort, only the cold satisfaction of justice beginning to unfold. The judge struck the gavel. This court will reconvene tomorrow to determine the consequences of this testimony. As Mark was led away, whispers followed him. Cheater. Fraud. Ruined. His downfall had begun, and there was no path left for him to reclaim the life he had destroyed. Isabella stood tall beside James, her hand resting on her belly. For the first time, she felt the tide had truly turned, and Mark's punishment was only just beginning. When court resumed the following day, the air was thick with anticipation. Everyone knew the spotlight had shifted. Mark's downfall had already begun, but now it was Sophia Miller's turn to face the fire. Sophia entered the courtroom dressed in black, her makeup heavy to hide the sleepless nights. She tried to project calmness, but her trembling hands betrayed her. The glamorous mistress, who once strutted proudly through hospital halls, now looked cornered, a queen stripped of her crown. The prosecutor wasted no time. Miss Miller, multiple witnesses have placed you at the scene of Mr. Turner's attack. Financial records link you to suspicious withdrawals. And yesterday, Victor Hayes testified under oath that you paid him to assault Mark Turner. Do you deny this? Sophia's voice quivered. Yes, I deny it. He's lying. They're all lying. James stood, his tone razor-sharp. Then explain this. He held up a set of documents, bank transfers from Mark's account to an anonymous shell account that eventually traced back to Sophia. The timing matched Victor's testimony perfectly. The judge's eyes narrowed. Ms. Miller, do you have an explanation? Sophia's face flushed red. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Instead, she shot a desperate glance toward Mark, as if begging for him to save her. But Mark, already disgraced, stared straight ahead, refusing to meet her eyes. The prosecutor pressed on. And let's not forget the hospital footage. You were seen confronting Isabella Turner moments before she collapsed, nearly losing her child. Would you like to explain that, Miss Miller? Sophia's mask cracked. She's lying. She provoked me. She... But her voice was drowned out by gasps from the courtroom. Everyone had seen enough. The lavish mistress was nothing more than a manipulative fraud. The judge banged the gavel. Order, Miss Miller. Given the testimony, evidence, and your repeated contradictions, this court has sufficient grounds to charge you with conspiracy, assault, and financial fraud. The words hit Sophia like a thunderclap. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed into her chair. Reporters scribbled furiously, already crafting tomorrow's headlines. Mistress exposed. Sophia Miller from glamour to prison. As officers approached to escort her out, Sophia's composure shattered completely. She lunged toward Mark, her voice shrill. You promised me everything. You said we'd build a life together. Don't let them do this to me. Mark pulled his arm away, his face twisted with disgust. You used me, just like you used everyone else. We're finished. The rejection cut deeper than the charges. Sophia screamed, clawing at the air as if she could hold on to the fantasy slipping away. But no one reached for her. Not Mark, not his parents, not a single friend. She was utterly alone. As she was dragged from the courtroom, her cries echoed down the hall. The woman who once believed she could steal Isabella's life was now stripped of her freedom, her wealth, and her illusions. Isabella watched in silence, her heart pounding. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply placed a protective hand over her belly. Sophia had tried to take everything from her, and now Sophia had nothing left at all. When the judge returned to the bench the following morning, the courtroom was silent, heavy with expectation. Everyone leaned forward, waiting to hear what would become of the battered wife, the disgraced husband, and the fallen mistress. Isabella sat beside James, her hands folded neatly over her swollen belly. For the first time in months, her posture was upright, her gaze steady. The judge cleared his throat. After careful consideration of the testimony, evidence, and records presented, this court acknowledges that Mrs. Isabella Turner has been the victim of repeated abuse, humiliation, and defamation. The words landed like music in Isabella's ears. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the relief wash over her. The judge continued, his voice firm. Therefore, Isabella Turner is granted full custody of her unborn child. Mark Turner, due to his history of abuse and financial instability, is deemed unfit for parental rights until proven otherwise. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Mark's head dropped into his hands, his face ashen. Isabella didn't look at him. She focused on the judge's words, each one lifting the chains that had bound her for so long. Furthermore, the judge went on, given the threats against her safety, Mrs. Turner is granted a permanent restraining order against both Mark Turner and Sophia Miller. Any violation of this order will result in immediate imprisonment. Isabella felt James's reassuring hand on her arm. She nodded faintly, tears forming in her eyes, not of sorrow this time, but of victory. The judge's gaze softened slightly as he addressed her directly. Mrs. Turner, this court recognizes your strength and resilience. May you and your child find the peace and protection you deserve. The gavel struck. The session was over. For a moment, Isabella sat frozen, unable to move as the weight of years lifted from her shoulders. Then she rose, her steps slow but steady. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Cameras flashed, capturing her every move. But this time, Isabella didn't cower. She held her head high, her hand on her belly, her expression calm and dignified. Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered, some holding signs. Justice for Isabella. Protect the mothers. Strangers reached out to touch her hand, thanking her for her courage. For the first time, she wasn't whispered about in shame. She was celebrated. Her parents stood waiting at the steps. Her mother's eyes brimmed with tears as she embraced her tightly. "You did it, sweetheart. You did it." Her father, usually stoic, kissed her forehead. "I've never been prouder of you." Isabella wept in their arms, but they were tears of release, of triumph. That evening, back in her apartment, Isabella sat by the window, cradling her belly as the city lights glowed below. She whispered to her unborn child, "We're free now, the world knows the truth, and soon we'll start over, together." Her reflection in the glass no longer looked like a victim. It looked like a woman reborn, ready to build a new life. But fate had one more surprise waiting, someone who would offer her not just safety, but love she had never known before. Weeks passed after the trial, and Isabella slowly began to rebuild her life. Though she was free from Mark and Sophia, the weight of everything she had endured still lingered. She focused on preparing for the arrival of her baby, attending doctor's appointments, and finding strength in small victories. Sleeping peacefully for the first time in years, smiling without guilt, and walking through the city without fear of whispers. One crisp autumn afternoon, Isabella attended a charity gala hosted at the Metropolitan Hotel. James had encouraged her to go, insisting it would be good for her to meet people, to step back into the world not as a victim, but as a survivor. At first, she was hesitant, but something inside her told her it was time. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, the sound of violins floating through the air. Isabella wore a simple yet elegant gown, her pregnancy visible but embraced. She walked in with quiet grace, drawing admiring glances from strangers who didn't know her past, only the strength she radiated now. As she stood by the refreshment table, a voice spoke beside her. "You look like someone who doesn't want to be here." She turned and saw a man she had never met before. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver at his temples and kind blue eyes, he wore a tailored suit with effortless confidence. Despite his presence, his smile was warm, not arrogant. "I suppose you're right," Isabella admitted softly. "I'm not used to places like this anymore." He extended his hand. "Ethan Williams." Her eyes widened slightly. She had heard the name before. He was one of New York's most influential real estate magnates, a billionaire known not just for his wealth, but for his philanthropy. Still, he spoke to her as if she were the only person in the room. "Isabella Turner," she said, shaking his hand. Their conversation flowed easily. Ethan didn't ask about gossip or headlines. Instead, he asked about her dreams, her passions, her work as a nurse before marriage. For the first time in a long while, someone saw her not as a scandal, not as a victim, but as a woman with value and purpose. At one point, Ethan glanced at her belly and smiled gently. "You're going to be an incredible mother. I can see it already." The words nearly brought Isabella to tears. She had heard so many cruel things, that she was weak, unfit, a burden. But here was a man speaking with sincerity, with respect. By the end of the evening, Ethan offered her his card. "If you ever need anything, a connection, support, even just a friend, call me. You deserve a fresh start, Isabella." She tucked the card into her purse, her heart strangely light. As she left the gala, she whispered to her baby, "Maybe, just maybe, fate is giving us another chance." Isabella didn't know then that Ethan Williams would become more than a friend. He would become the man who helped her rewrite her life, offering her not just safety, but a love stronger than anything she had ever known. 2 years later, the life Isabella lived was unrecognizable compared to the nightmare she once endured. She stood in the garden of a sprawling estate just outside New York City, sunlight streaming through the trees, her wedding veil fluttering in the breeze. Beside her stood Ethan Williams, the man who had restored her faith in love. The ceremony was small and intimate, attended by close friends and family. James stood proudly at her side, giving her away as if she were his own sister. Isabella's parents wept tears of joy, seeing their daughter radiant and free at last. Ethan's teenage son, once wary of Isabella, now smiled warmly, holding the hand of the little girl Isabella had given birth to a year earlier. A daughter with Ethan's piercing blue eyes. As she spoke her vows, Isabella's voice was steady, filled with conviction. "I once thought my story was only pain, but today I stand here knowing pain does not define me. Love does, hope does, family does, and with you, Ethan, I have found all three." When they kissed, applause rang through the garden. Isabella's son, the boy she had fought so hard to protect from Mark's world, ran up and hugged them both tightly. For the first time, Isabella's family felt whole, complete. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. Life with Ethan was different in every way. He cherished her, respected her, and valued her voice. Together, they raised their blended family, filling their home with laughter and warmth. Isabella returned to nursing part-time, her passion for helping others reignited, while also embracing the joy of being a mother to 2 children, and a stepmother to a boy who now called her Mom. But not everyone's story ended in joy. Mark Turner's life spiraled into ruin. Convicted of fraud and implicated in Sophia's crimes, he served time in prison. By the time he was released, his health had collapsed. Years of drinking, stress, and regret left him frail and sick. Alone in a cheap apartment, he stared at photos of the life he once had, the wife who had loved him, the son he barely knew, the respect he had squandered. Sophia, once his glamorous mistress, had long since abandoned him. When his money dried up, so did her affection. She vanished without a trace, leaving Mark to drown in solitude. One rainy evening, Mark caught sight of a magazine cover in a store window. It showed Isabella and Ethan at a charity gala, smiling with their children. The headline read, "From Tragedy to Triumph, Isabella Williams's Inspiring Journey." Mark's hands shook as he held the magazine. His eyes blurred with tears as he whispered, "I had it all, and I destroyed it." Regret consumed him, but it was too late. The world had moved on, and so had Isabella. Back at the Williams estate, Isabella tucked her children into bed, kissed Ethan goodnight, and stepped onto the balcony. The stars glittered above as she whispered, "We made it." Her story had begun with pain, but it ended with hope, love, and justice. And that was the ending she, and every woman like her, deserved.